But you got to depend on God right now, man. You got to really lean into your relationship with Christ.
That's given if they have a relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
I think that's where most of the fear comes from. Because, again, like we just said, man, like...
We said a relationship with Christ, not a relationship with the church.
Oh, yeah.
In case you haven't noticed, they closed the churches.
Oh, yeah. And so if your worship is stopped because you didn't have church this morning, that's a big problem. It's a big red flag. But, you know, if you have a relationship with Christ, like that's the biggest thing. And I believe people who don't have a relationship with Christ, they're panicking right now because their faith is on something that's not solid. There's no foundation. There's no solidity to it. There's nothing to build on. You've built your entire life on surface material. And this is what, you know, they talk about, like, I believe it's Matthew 7:24, where it talks about building on foundations. And I think when Jesus is telling this parable, you know, I don't want to misquote, you know, what he said, but Jesus is saying, like, building on a solid foundation. He says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. You know, just to pause right there, like that rock being the word of God, that rock being on the only one who holds your next breath in his hands, which is God, which is Christ. And in verse 25, he says, though the rain comes, it torrents and the flood waters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. So just to put that into perspective, if you think about like what happens to houses out in California, like when there's like a lot of rain and you see these mudslides, bro, and like all these houses go sliding off the cliff, or you see a house built on the backside of a mountain, the foundations aren't dug deep enough. So when the land starts to shift or the mud starts to shift when there's a lot of rain, you then find out that the trenches weren't dug deep enough, bro. They were building on like chert and dirt and rocks, but there was no bedrock. You know, you got to dig deep enough to where you can build a solid foundation. And in verse 26, he says, but anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rain and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash.
I love that parable. It kind of goes back to the be a doer of the word, not a hearer. James talks about it.
Right.
So there is building your house on a solid foundation, which is righteousness. If you just break that parable down to the core, Christ is basically saying, do what I teach. And then, like, let's use Psalms, for example. The righteous will be surrounded by the favor of God. That's a biblical concept that, listen, you do what I teach, you live righteously, you live holy, and I'll protect you.
Right.
That is God's promise to you. And Christ is saying, do what I say. It's like building your house upon rock.